That sounds like a fun weekend, but that's not what you really want.
What do I want?
What you've never had. An equal.
Performance capture is about really the performance. The actors are playing each scene all the way through, so it's very much like theater. We'll sit there in a small room with just, 20 or so people and watch these small, intimate performances and then just wonder about how we're going to bring that to the screen.
Hello and welcome to a special episode of the Hollywood Reporters Behind the Screen, in partnership with 20th Century Studios, featuring artisans who helped to create Avatar, Fire and Ash from the Oscar-winning filmmaker James Cameron. I'm your host, THR contributing editor Stacey Wilson Hunt. My guests today are visual effects supervisor and executive producer Richard Baneham, senior visual effects supervisor Joe Letteri, senior visual effects supervisor for Wētā, Eric Saindon, and senior animation supervisor for Wētā, Daniel Barrett. Congratulations, gentlemen, to all of you on Avatar, Fire and Ash, which is an incredible new chapter in James Cameron's saga. How does it feel to be able to share this film with the world, finally?
Pretty excited. I think I may be unique in the group here in that I avoided all of the getting to see the movie before it came out. I, of course, saw everything as it was going through, but I waited till last night to see it with an audience the first time all the way through. And I had a great time, and I hope everyone else did as well. That's one of the reasons we like working on films like this is we want to see them. So we put the effort into making them so that we have that moment ourselves.
Well said, Joe.
Of course, you're fan first.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm super excited because on the last one, my kids were a little young to have known about the cultural touchstone that was the first Avatar, so I flew under the radar, but now they know. So they've been waiting to see this.
I think you said it very well. Being a fan is an interesting sort of way to look at the movie. And it's 2 hours and 77 minutes of thrill ride. It really does have pace. So it's one of the things I think, albeit the exploration into grief truly expands the vocabulary of Pandora, but it is a thrill ride.
I thought it was great seeing it for the first time with a big crowd last night, watching the audience's reactions, and not seeing anyone get up to go to the bathroom. I mean, it's not a short movie, and no one got up. Everyone just sat there the whole time and watched the whole thing, and it shows you how involved everyone gets into the movie itself, and it's such a fun thing. No one wants to miss a thing.
It's an interesting thing as well to see it with such a big audience and see quips that you're worried won't land or that we've seen in a dry hall for so long. You're watching them again and you get a giggle the first time but when you see them over and over, you sort of lose the context of the audience. And once the audience is there and one person giggles, the whole place lights up, and I was really surprised at how much comedy read through.
Yeah, that's great.
And to your point, no one getting up during the screening, that is the ultimate compliment. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Really something.
That's what we strive for.
So for me, it's quite amazing to think about the lifespan of this story. James wrote the first Avatar in 1995. And of course, the first film came out in 2009. And then, of course, sequels, The Way of Water and now Fire and Ash, were filmed back to back in 2017, released in 2022, and now 2025. So we're talking essentially here of a 30-year journey. And in fact, Joe, you've gone so far as to say the tools that you had at the beginning were, quote, primitive compared to what you have now. So I'd like to ask you and Richard, can you contextualize for us what was so groundbreaking about the performance capture technology that you utilized in the first Avatar, and how what we see in Fire and Ash represents the next evolution of this craft? So Joe, maybe get us started there.
Yeah, let me take a step back. When we were working on King Kong, this was at the end of 2005, Jon Landau called me because we had met with Jim and Jon when we were starting King Kong. They were interested in what we had been doing with Gollum, and also knew that going into King Kong, we were having to do some world building, especially creating a forest. So Jon called me about 6 months before we delivered that film and told me that Jim had a script he wanted me to read, or a scriptment, and that was the 1995 Avatar that you were referring to. And he sent it to me and called me back a few days later and said, "What did you think?" And I said, "Jon, we have to make this movie because I really want to see it." And so we got involved with that whole process, right? They were really interested in what we had done to create Gollum, what we had learned from it, where we were going from that. So I flew to Los Angeles to meet with Jim and Jon, and when I walked in the door, there was Richie already there. And of course, Richie and I had worked together on Gollum, on Lord of the Rings. Richie was the animation supervisor. So we had that history, and we're just able to pick it up from there.
Yeah, it's interesting, Joe. I was actually going to say it goes back even further that Joe has suggested. Myself and Joe started at Wētā the same week on Lord. And the evolution of that facial technology really was through Gollum, and then obviously that's part of the reason that piqued Jim's interest in making the movie and reached out. Obviously, myself and Joe were on the original test, and it was interesting to see the span of that rig that we built for Gollum really come all the way through to, from obviously one right the way through to maybe I think it was Battle Angel was the last time it was used. And at that point, Joe and the team had started to explore a completely new approach on the facial. And I think that breakthrough really allowed us to scale to multiple characters. And that was the challenge with the later movies, was we were contained with the sort of viable performances we had to give with our actors, really was contained to Jake and Letteri. If Jake and Letteri worked in one, we had a movie. By the time we got to 2 and 3, we had to expand not just to a whole family, but to the clans having a more meaningful role. And I think that sort of moving forward on we talk about it as performance capture, but it really was the capture side, and then bringing it to fruition through Wētā's technology, and the facial really came to life. Now there is a huge amount of involvement of the animators and the artisans, getting hands on and making sure that we honor the actor's performance. But I think there's just been a massive leap forward in from a technological standpoint, but really I think a cultural standpoint as to how we treat performance, our reliance on our actors, and the truthfulness and the honesty of the actors, and us keeping that alive. In a lot of ways, the group you're looking at, the four of us and a big team behind us, it's our job to shepherd that performance to screen, and that's every day. It's that conversation.
That's exactly right. I mean, we rely a lot on the technology, but the technology only gets you so far. It's a good starting point. We try to get it to the point where the animators can spend all of their time gauging the performance and making sure that it connects with the audience, because we know how to measure technically, what we're getting out of the performance capture. But the ultimate test is when you look at it side by side with, say Zoe's performance side by side with Letteri's performance. The ultimate test is, am I getting the same emotion out of it? Because if the answer is no, it doesn't matter what the math tells you. You've got to go back, and the animators just have to delve into it and try to figure out what's missing and bring that to it. And it's an art that evolves with the characters. At the end of the shoot for film 2, and this was well before we started production, Jon Landau brought each of the actors over to meet with the facial animation team, and they would spend an hour or so just discussing their role. Things like what they thought the character was going to be when they started, and how it evolved, and what they realized the character was, by the time it was over. Because in the end, they're handing this off to the animation team to understand what choices they made and to be able to honor those choices. And that's a really big part of what we do.
Yeah, I said Dan was part of that original meeting, and again, Dan headed up the team both on the motion and facial side, and I think it was that relationship with the actors and the performance, really. I think the team, Dan, you should probably speak to that.
Yeah, yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, I guess I would just like to reinforce the fact that, that our job is to bring these incredible performances through. But there's a couple of statements that I could make, and one of them is that, without the amazing team that we have, the film wouldn't look as good as it does. But the other statement I would make that lives happily side by side with that is that it's the performances. It's 100% the performances of the actors and the skill of the team, and obviously assisted with the technology, is to ensure that those performances are there 100%. And because it's the heart of the film. Without it, it wouldn't matter how many explosions you had or amazing set pieces. We just wouldn't have the film that we saw last night. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think the ability for the animators have they all understand these characters now too. After working with them for 3 films, they just understand Zoe and they understand Sam, and all of these characters, which just it allows them to add so much more detail to the characters and make sure they're getting that performance that the actor was portraying.
I think the addition of Una as well. You're right, Eric. That the time spent with the actors, or with the characters up to this point, allowed us to really have a honed skill to jump in and take Una's performance and transfer it to Varang. I think it's interesting to me watching the movie last night. I realized how much Una's performance really affected Slang's performance, that their chemistry on screen, they just were so good together. Mm-hmm. It's like, I think, Stephen has been with us from movie 1, but I think without doubt, this is his best performance.
Well, you see so much more, right? Yeah.
Just life to him,
And exactly. There's a sparkle in his eye all of a sudden.
Literally was.
Yeah.
For those watching and listening, we're talking about Una Chaplin, the new addition to Fire and Ash, and Stephen Lang, who, of course, has been part of the series since the beginning. And I agree. They are very fiery. They have quite a connection, those two.
Yeah, they're so charismatic. It's delicious to watch.
I agree. Yeah. And Eric and Daniel, I'd like to talk to you. How did your process most evolve in terms of how Wētā worked with James and his team on Fire and Ash? And specifically, I'm interested in things like, how did the process of managing, say, files and templates become easier? But what parts of the process remain challenging as the movies progressed?
Well, one of the things that was, different for us this time is that Eric was very close to Jim at all times, So he was, in some ways, we had a little sort of, Wētā office embedded with Jim, which was fantastic. I worked very closely with Richie, as I have over the years, but having Eric there at Jim's side was a big change for us. That made things, a lot easier in terms of turnaround, notes and things like that.
I agree. Having Jim here, like being able to work with Jim every day and him explaining why he wants to do a shot a certain way, and to explain why you have to overlap a shot by 4 frames, or just how you're going to frame something from shot to shot, to make people's eye not get tired looking around the screen. It's just simple things like that you're learning as you go from Jim. It is a masterclass every day of creativity and storytelling, and it just is a privilege to be able to work on these films.
I've sat in reviews and listened to Jim talking about something, and he may have a note on the camera that doesn't quite cut to his liking. And there's been many occasions where I'll just open that scene up, tweak that camera, and before the review's over, Eric can just put it up in front of him and say, "How's that?" So that kind of that really tight relationship and fast turnaround is just been such a sort of a helpful and pivotal thing, I think, on this one.
Jim works out so much of what he wants ahead of time, using the virtual camera and on the virtual stage. Richie is also a really big part of that. He vets everything, makes sure that everything is working and prepped and ready to go, blocks out a lot of the cameras, in fact, creates a lot of the final cameras. So it's a really collaborative process because we've all gotten to work with Jim so closely. And so what that means is Jim has a good idea what he wants. So our first job is to show him that. But if in the course of working with it and, refining from like the coarser visuals to the more refined, we see something that we think might work better, whether it's a cut, a camera, a little animation change, he's open to it. He's very willing to to look at it, and then if it works, great. If it doesn't work, or even if it does work, he'll tell us why. He, as Eric says, he will explain how it fits into the story process, because he wants us all to be part of that process. It makes the story better. It makes his life easier if we're all engaged with making the same film.
It's an interesting thing that you touched on. The template became, in a weird way, the vocabulary of the movie for us. Obviously, we're producing a content that never ends up on screen, but becomes this shorthand for informing every single frame of the movie. But it really allows the dynamic that you see here, the four of us, to be able to get together and go, how do we stand up the best version of that shot? How do you put all of the effort into the final image and not the iterative process? So by pulling the iterations forward into the template and being able to loop quickly and get stuff up in front of Jim and get approval to a point of it's far from final, but it's a representation of the final intention. And I think that allows Dan and Eric and Joe to really run with it and go, all right, we know where it's headed. We know we have to stand up the very first review. And something I never thought Jim would ever say, and Jim said it himself, he'd say final on first look. And it happened on this because it became so honed at sort of the process of taking the template and making it, a close to final version. I don't know what the numbers are, Joe or Eric. Actually, you might know. How many were first look finals?
We had a fair number, which for the first time, we didn't have very many on Way of Water. But on this film, we probably had a couple hundred shots that were first look finals. It's never the first look, right? First look being version 500 most of the time, because we spend a lot of time getting the shots right, working with Richie, working with Jamie Landau on looking at the shots and knowing what Jim's going to want before he ever sees it. So it's not like we're just throwing something out there. It's we're spending a lot of time on these shots. We understand Jim. We know where he's going. No one understands it better than Richie, so he's able to help us, guide us along too. So. Yeah,
but Jim is very happy when if we show him something that he's not seen for the first time all the way through, and he has no notes. That's what we're all after. Yeah,
that's a huge win, I imagine, in that moment.
It is.
Right?
It's great. Yeah.
Richie, I wanted to talk a little bit more about something we hinted at earlier. For me, so much of what makes the special effects in Fire and Ash so compelling is, despite all the technology we've talked about, the performers' hearts and souls are never missing from our experience. What are some of the more clever methods that you've employed to keep humanity at the center of the special effects in Avatar? I read that you even had a database of the actors' expressions, facial expressions. Tell me how you managed that.
Yeah, well, again, that's actually on the Wētā side. One of the things we did very early, and it goes all the way back to Gollum, we did facts, a facial, sort of ROM, range of motion for each actor's face. But the truth is, that's on the technical side. The real trick of it is providing an environment where the actors can be completely free. Removing the shot creation from the front end allows our actors to be completely engaged in the moment with their scene partners. And I think that's the key. Keeping the magic alive is dependent on the magic being there in the beginning. And that's the real trick of it, is investing on the front end in a situation where your actors can be as credible as possible. And I think there's so many scenes. The one that struck me last night was the interaction between Letteri and Ronald on the rock when she's given birth. That's an incredibly touching moment. And to see Kate and Zoe perform that in real time, and it was unencumbered by a technical need to put a camera, in at any given time, ask them to do it twice because it's close-up. So again, just to allow them to be in the moment and capture that performance, that's really the heart and soul of it. And we often have a conversation, myself and Dan particularly, about the division between text, subtext, and inner monologue. It's the one, it's what the performer is saying, and it means very little. It's what they mean when they speak, and it's what they're thinking. And if we can capture that part of the process, we can make it seem like there's a a soul, a presence behind the eyes. And that's really done by breaking down that inner monologue and trying to understand what the actor really intends when, the intonation, the specific vocabulary they use is kind of almost the heart and soul of the character, and that's the real trick.
Yeah, you make a good point, Rich, because performance capture is about really the performance. You take the camera out of it. The actors are playing each scene all the way through. So it's very much like theater. And some of the actors, I think, will tell you this because it is stripped down without, the sets, like very minimal sets that they can use for touchstones. It is very much like theater and imagination. And you get to watch these performances all the way through. And then, Jim will craft the shots around those performances, but it's a different way of watching it. We'll sit there in a small room with just, 20 or so people and watch these like small intimate performances and then just wonder about how we're going to bring that to the screen.
Truly stunning.
I just thought about what Joe said. The fact that the performance is driving the camera choice is very unusual because quite often on a live action set, you're forced to make a decision about what the shot is. And then in a lot of ways, the actor has to fit inside the shot. And, we're in a very different situation whereby, we get to craft the storytelling portion of the shot creation around the performance. And it's driven by the performance. So hopefully that's one of the things that really allows us to invest in the craft of filmmaking and future-proof what the sort of the next steps. We'd like to encourage and maybe even evangelize this process, with other filmmakers.
That's so interesting. Thank you so much for that. And Daniel, I'd like to talk to you about some of the themes in the film. If water was a theme in the first sequel, of course, water as life force. For me, Fire and Ash is a movie that showcases the clashing of earthy elements, such as fire and metals. It's sort of that play. And I love the themes of them discovering ammunition and metal versus their homemade weapons. Like that's a really interesting interplay in the film. And of course, with these themes come a whole new palette. We see a lot of reds in this movie, the Ash people and the colors that they use on their bodies. And I'm wondering, how did the new addition of these themes and these colors change the palette you were working with? And what excited you about these additions?
Well, I think, for me, what excited me the most was just seeing this new tribe. They're the complete opposite of any Na'vi that we've seen before, who live in a very sort of symbiotic relationship with Pandora and their worship of Ewa. But we see a whole new side of that planet with the Ash people and sort of fire being both their sort of foundation story and their object of worship. And they're just so different, and you see it everywhere, right? All the way through Una's physical performance. She's so different to anyone. She moves in such a different way to anyone that we've seen before. Fire was obviously, the thing that sort of formed them and also the thing that they carried forward, the only pure thing. Yeah, so new challenges. Obviously, the art department always do an incredible job. I think that her costume is a really interesting thing, but also just the fact that, she wears makeup. Like one of the things you'll note with, other Na'vi that we've seen is they tend to, like at the beginning we see Letteri with her morning makeup on, and you'll see war paint, right? So in the Na'vi that we've seen before, Varang's really interesting because she's kind of at war with the world. Like she's got makeup on all the time. She's got a real chip on her shoulder. And so, just a really interesting new facet to the societies that we see on Pandora.
I was going to add to that the fact that the Ash are actually they're very similar to the Na'vi we know, the Amatakaya. They are blue. They have the same stripes, the same structure underneath. But as you watch the film, you really understand that they're covered in ash. They have all the piercings and they look very different. They're a much scarier crowd, but at base, they are very much the same. So it's what really makes them stand out when you see a crowd of them. And they're very interesting clan. And I think it really just adds to that in the film. It's just something different. It's not the humans and the against the Na'vi. It's actually something very different for this film, which really adds to it.
And if you look at the fire and the destruction and how that evolves, during the template process, it's very gestural. It's a lot of basically little clips of explosions or fires on cards that get placed around the scene and scaled and combined and retimed so that visually, Jim can indicate what he wants. But then there's a whole process of turning that into something physically plausible that will do what he wants, that still maintains the proper detail and speed and scale. And that is a very iterative process with the artists and with the effects team. And I think that's, Eric, you spent a lot of time, with Jim just day to day going through that part of it, because it had to be directable. It had to be exactly what Jim wanted, but it had to be fantastic in the way that he wanted it to be.
Yeah, the fire became a character in the film, right? Like in the flux itself, seeing the fire, directing the fire as it moved through and interacted with the rocks and the characters, and like you say, the flamethrowers, being able to direct the eye, direct the motion of the shots. It really had to be a character, which I think added to the whole concept.
So I have a question for everyone, and maybe Joe, you can get started. It's hard to talk about this film and the legacy of Avatar without talking about Jon Landau, who, of course, we lost last year. Your wonderful producer passed away in 2024. Such an immense loss for our business, but I'm sure for your family as well. What is a memory that you have, Joe, of working with Jon that you think exemplifies his genius as a producer when it comes to working in special effects, but also just something that you want people to know about him as an artist and a friend?
Probably the greatest thing about Jon is he was a great friend. He was very interested in everyone who worked on the film. He was interested in what everyone did, what they thought about, how they brought things to the film. And he was so involved with what we did. Like, look, Jon, when we started this process, how many years ago, didn't know a whole lot about visual effects, but he was constantly asking questions and sitting down with artists and being involved in the process and looking at what we did. On the second film, because we were shooting simultaneously with prepping the shots, we didn't have a lot of Jim's time, and Jon stepped in to fill in the gap. He sat with us. He sat as we developed the shots. He learned. He was just so much a part of what we did. And I'm only talking about it from our aspect. He did the same thing on the public side, to get theater owners aware of the potential of these films and to get audiences aware of the films themselves. I mean, Jon just spanned the film from start to finish. We miss him.
Yeah, it was an immense loss. I mean, the truth is, Jon had this incredible ability to meet everybody at their level. It didn't matter whether he was talking to the CEO of Disney or he was talking to, somebody's kid. He would just jump in and engage, and again, look, I can only say that my parents and my family have met Jon a handful of times. And I promise you, my dad truly believes or talks about Jon as his friend, like he's known him his whole life. Jon had this amazing ability to make you the center of the universe when he spoke to you. Yeah. And unbelievable talent to be that present and that engaged. And I'm sure everybody has had the same experience.
My parents would say the same thing.
Nobody walks away from meeting Jon without that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, totally agree. I was saying to someone earlier that I considered him, like, I would say I considered Jon a good friend, after the last film. And there are hundreds or thousands of people around the world who would make that same statement and genuinely believe it, because he was that kind of guy, And on top of all that, I don't think he ever slept. He had boundless energy. He was all over everything. He was a one in a million, and a huge loss. Huge loss.
Mm. Well, I was very happy to see that his son Jamie is still involved and on the team. So that must be wonderful to have his legacy live through his son.
Interestingly, Jamie came to us started as a PA, then ended up as part of the troupe, one of the actors. And Jamie is so disciplined that he would learn not just his lines, but every line. And when the actors in any way stumble, he would feed them the line. Literally every time he had the whole thing rehearsed, and you could see he has his dad's discipline. That's one of the reasons why Jamie became an integral part of the process. And he has moved through the steps of the movie to now be, a producer in his own right. And he spends 90% of his time with Jim on a day-to-day trying to manage, again, not unlike his dad, a huge circus.
This is just my opinion here, but I feel like that must have been a really big thing for Jim, right? Because Jim would have felt that loss as keenly as anyone. That relationship has been an incredible relationship over the years. So to have that sort of continuity of Jamie being there during that really difficult time and then continuing on with the work that he's done on the film, I think that was something that I really enjoyed seeing happen personally on this film.
And Jamie's really stepped up.
Right.
He understands filmmaking. He understands how shots should work. He understands the whole process. He's lived with it his whole life, living with his dad. So he's been great. Absolutely.
Jamie is a filmmaker in his own right. I don't know if you've ever seen his shorts. Like before Jamie came to us, he was already making movies. And so he truly does come from that creative standpoint. It's great to have him on board.
He had a great teacher, it sounds.
Mm-hmm.
He certainly did.
So in closing, I'd like to talk about something that I know is very passionate for all of you and Jim. And when I saw the film, there was a precursor to the film that was James Cameron, talking to the audience, essentially telling us AI was not used to make this film. What you're about to see is a handmade, handcrafted piece of storytelling. And he is such an advocate for this because he also wants to remind people so much of what we discussed, that humans are at the center of Avatar. So for each of you, what is one thing you hope fans will better understand about your work on the visual effects team when they see Fire and Ash? And what are you proudest of having achieved? Maybe Dan, you can get us started.
Yeah, well, I think that generative AI was certainly not used in the making of this film, and we're nowhere near being in a place where that would be possible. Jim paints every frame. Every frame's an artwork. There's no way you get there without Lightstorm artists at Wētā delivering on his vision. It's a singular vision. I don't know. Maybe we get to a point where somehow that's possible, but I don't know. Obviously, it comes back to and I'm going to tie this into the thing that I'm most proud of. Right, I'm most proud of bringing those performances through. AI doesn't have anywhere near the heart that we see in these performances. Doesn't even come close. So these are human performances.
I think filmmaking in general is a collaborative art, and that's the thing about the AI side of things. It just fundamentally isn't, and it's not designed to be. You're asking it to go off and take the average of all its information and feed you back answers. It's exclusionary in that way. When you think about our process, our day-to-day process is each of us engaging in a creative conversation about how to bring this movie to life. And it's like, that is truly a collaboration, I think. And I'd like to think this has been the biggest collaborative piece of artwork anybody ever gets to see.
Mm-hmm.
Watching the film before it was all put together as just a performance capture, seeing the actors do their thing, all done as a just performance capture, not thinking about the cameras, not thinking about lighting or any of those things. It was still an amazing piece of art in that form. And then everything else added on top of it. Once we get the cameras, once we get the lighting, the effects and everything, it just adds it all to it. But the thing everyone has to understand, it is just the performances that make this film what it is. It's the heart and soul of the film.
We use computers to make pictures. We write tools on the computers to make the artists be as expressive as possible in their chosen specialty. But I think one of the secrets of this business is that it is very, very artist intensive. I think a lot of people may think computer, you push a button, you tell it what to do, you get a picture. When you're done with the film, sit and watch the credits and see how many artists actually worked on this. It's one of the dirty secrets is a lot of it is done by hand.
And the value, Joe, of any studio is the artist. That's the long and short of it. It's like technology is great, but it's only good if it's really powerful when it empowers the artist. That is the long and short of it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, on that note, I want to thank each of you for joining me today. Congratulations. What a stunning achievement. I can't wait for people to see Fire and Ash especially on the big screen, as Jim wants us to, by the way. That's his religion, right?
Yes.
That's the way to see it. Yeah.
And thank you so much for joining us today. I'd like to thank Richard, Joe, Eric, and Daniel for joining me today on this special episode of the Hollywood Reporters Behind the Screen. Tune in for more conversations with other artisans from Avatar, Fire and Ash. I'm Stacey Wilson Hunt. Thank you so much for listening.